I know everyone is eager to get started, so candidates, please take your places while I explain the ground rules for tonight. As moderator, I'll guide the discussion, and I'll be joined in the questioning by Salem Radio Network talk show host Hugh Hewitt and CNN's chief political correspondent Dana Bash. Hugh Hewitt, you have a question.
Senator Cruz, you've said you disagree with Mr. Trump's policy. I don't want a cage match. You've tweeted you don't want a cage match, but Republican primary voters deserve to know, with the kind of specificity and responsiveness you delivered in your 9 Supreme Court arguments, how you disagree with Mr. Trump. Will you spell that out with us?
Well, listen, Hugh, everyone understands why Donald has suggested what he has. We're looking at a president who's engaged in this doublespeak, where he doesn't call radical Islamic terrorism by its name. Indeed, he gives a speech after the San Bernardino attack where his approach is to try to go after the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens rather than to keep us safe. And even worse, President Obama and Hillary Clinton are proposing bringing tens of thousands of Syrian refugees to this country when the head of the FBI has told Congress they cannot vet those refugees. I understand why Donald made that proposal. I introduced legislation in the Senate that I believe is more narrowly focused at the actual threat, which is radical Islamic terrorism. And what my legislation would do is suspend all refugees for 3 years from countries where ISIS or al-Qaeda control substantial territory.
So you're saying you disagree because he's too broad and you're having a narrower focus? Why do you disagree with him?
You know, I'm reminded of what FDR's grandfather said. He said, all horse thieves are Democrats, but not all Democrats are horse thieves. In this instance, there are millions of peaceful Muslims across the world in countries like India where there is not the problems we are seeing in nations that are controlled, have territory controlled by al-Qaeda or ISIS, and we should direct at the problem, focus on the problem, and defeat radical Islamic terrorism. It's not a war on a faith. It's a war on a political and theocratic ideology that seeks to murder us.
Carly Fiorina, this is the Christmas dinner debate. This will be the debate that Americans talk about at Christmas. And thus far, in the first 10 minutes, we haven't heard a lot about Ronald Reagan's city on a hill. We've heard a lot about keeping Americans out, or keeping Americans safe and everyone else out. Is this what you want the party to stand for?
What I think we need to stand for are solutions. I offer myself as a leader to the people of this country because I think they're looking for solutions, not lawyers arguing over laws or entertainers throwing out sound bites that draw media attention. We need to solve the problem. To solve the problem, we need to do something here at home and something over there in their caliphate. We need to deny them territory. But here at home, we need to do 2 fundamental things. Number one, we need to recognize that technology has moved on. The Patriot Act was signed in 2001, roughly. The iPhone was invented in 2007. The iPad was invented in 2011. Snapchat and Twitter, all the rest of it, have been around just for several years. Technology has moved on and the terrorists have moved on with it. Let me tell you a story. Soon after 9/11, I got a phone call from the NSA. They needed help. I gave them help. I stopped a truck equipment. I had it turned around. It was escorted by the NSA into headquarters. We need the private sector's help because government is not innovating. Technology is running ahead by leaps and bounds. The private sector will help, just as I helped after 9/11. But they must be engaged and they must be asked. I will ask them. I know them.
Governor, with the next question.
Dr. Carson, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you're a pediatric neurologist surgeon. Neurosurgeon. And people admire and respect and are inspired by your life story, your kindness, your evangelical core support. We're talking about ruthless things tonight. Carpet bombing, toughness, war. And people wonder, could you do that? Could you order airstrikes that would kill innocent children by not the scores, but the hundreds and the thousands? Could you wage war as a commander-in-chief?
Well, interestingly enough, you should see the eyes of some of those children when I say to them, we're going to have to open your head up and take out this tumor. They're not happy about it, believe me. And they don't like me very much at that point. But later on, they love me. Sometimes I sound like him. Later on, they really realize what's going on. And by the same token, you have to be able to look at the big picture and understand that it's actually merciful if you go ahead and finish the job rather than death by 1,000 pricks.
So you are okay with the deaths of thousands of innocent children and civilians? It's like...
You got it. You got it.
That is what war... Can you be as ruthless as Churchill was in prosecuting the war against the Nazis?
Ruthless is not necessarily the word I would use, but tough, resolute, understanding what the problems are, and understanding that the job of the President of the United States is to protect the people of this country and to do what is necessary in order to get it done.
Senator Paul.
All of you agree to. Hugh, go ahead with your question.
Mr. Trump,
yes.
We are talking about the most important thing. That's why it's heated. And you're okay with Mr. Assad staying in power, but you're also in favor of winning. If he stays in power, Iran is winning. Hezbollah is winning. Iran is winning in Yemen. They are winning everywhere. If they're winning, how can we be winning?
I think Assad is a bad guy, very bad guy, all right? Lots of people killed. I think we're backing people. We have no idea who they are. The rebels. We call them the rebels, the patriotic rebels. We have no idea. A lot of people think that they're ISIS. We have to do one thing at a time. We can't be fighting ISIS and fighting Assad. Assad is fighting ISIS. He's fighting ISIS. Russia's fighting now ISIS. And Iran is fighting ISIS. We have to do one thing at a time. We can't go, and I watched Lindsey Graham. He said, I've been here for 10 years fighting. Well, he'll be there with that thinking for another 50 years. He won't be able to solve the problem. We have to get rid of ISIS first. After we get rid of ISIS, we'll start thinking about it. But we can't be fighting Assad. And when you're fighting Assad, you're fighting Russia, you're fighting Iran, you're fighting a lot of different groups. But we can't be fighting everybody at one time.
Governor Christie, is he right? Because if we step back, Iran goes nuclear. Is Donald Trump right?
Well, I think we have to focus, Hugh, on exactly what the priorities are. And to me, what I've always said is that the president has set up an awful situation through his deal with Iran. Because what his deal with Iran has done is empowered them and enriched them. And that's the way ISIS has been created and formed here. ISIS is created and formed because of the abuse that Assad and his Iranian sponsors have rained down on the Sunnis in Syria. And so when we empower Iran, this is why this president, and when Hillary Clinton says her theory against ISIS will be just about the same as the president, then get ready for more unrest and more murder and more violence in the Middle East. We need to focus our attention on Iran, because if you miss Iran, you're not going to get ISIS. The two are inextricably connected because one causes the other.
Senator Paul, let me ask you, you heard Governor Kasich say Assad must go. Do you agree?
No, I think it's a huge mistake. I think regime change in Syria, and I've been saying this for several years now. In 2013, when we first went in, I said, you're going to give arms to the allies of al-Qaeda, to radical jihadists? That's crazy. But the other thing I said is the great irony is you'll be back fighting against your own weapons. Had Assad been bombed when he used chemical weapons 2 years ago, ISIS would be in charge of all of Syria now. We have to have a more realistic foreign policy and not a utopian one where we say, oh, we're going to spread freedom and democracy and everybody in the Middle East is going to love us.
Governor
They're not
Kasich,
going
a
to
huge
love us.
mistake.
Look, in foreign policy, you have to know how to pick and choose. There's no way, if Saddam had not had weapons of mass destruction, I would have gone. Because I don't believe that U.S. should be involved directly in civil wars. I opposed the U.S. involvement in Lebanon. We ended up having to withdraw our Marines after our barracks were blown up. There's a difference between Iraq, where you have Sunni, Shia, and Kurds put together after First World War by the Western powers. It doesn't work. It needs to break up into three parts. And finally, in regard to Syria, understand that Assad is an ally of Iran who wants to extend that Shia radicalism all the way across the Middle East. He has to go. And for the Russians, frankly, it's time that we punch the Russians in the nose. They've gotten away with too much in this world, and we need to stand up against them, not just there,
but also in Eastern Europe, where they threaten some of our most precious allies.
Let's continue with Russia.
Commander-in-Chief question. You said that Mr. Trump is not qualified to be president because he's not qualified to deal with Vladimir Putin. Why are you better qualified to deal with Vladimir Putin than Mr. Trump?
Because first of all, I know what I don't know. I know what I don't know. I would seek out, as I have, the best advice that exists. I won't get my information from the shows. I don't know if that's Saturday morning or Sunday morning. I don't know which one. I will seek out the best advice, and I will create a strategy, and I will persuade the American people what the role of America should be. I've laid out a policy of rebuilding our military. All of the talk that we're saying here, most of which I agree on, frankly, requires a much stronger military. We now have a lack of readiness that is quite scary. We have planes that Harry Truman inaugurated, the B-52. We have the Navy has been gutted and decimated. The readiness of the Marines is way down. If we're serious about America's leadership in the world, then we need to make sure that we have the back of the armed forces. The Armed Forces Radio is here listening to this today. I hope they know that if I'm president, I'll be a commander-in-chief, not an agitator-in-chief or a divider-in-chief, that I will lead this country in a way that will create security and greater safety.
Mr. Trump.
I think it's very sad that CNN leads Jeb Bush, Governor Bush, down a road by starting off virtually all of the questions. Mr. Trump this, I think it's very sad. And frankly, I think it's very sad. And frankly, I watched the first debate, and the first long number of questions were, Mr. Trump said this, Mr. Trump said that, Mr. Trump. These poor guys, although I must tell you, Santorum, good guy. Governor Huckabee, good guy. They were very nice, and I respect them greatly. But I thought it was very unfair that virtually the entire early portion of the debate was Trump this, Trump that, in order to get ratings,
but Mr. Trump, it's not
in order
CNN.
to get ratings,
Mr. Trump, I was on CNN last night watching.
Excuse me. I think it's very unprofessional.
But it wasn't CNN. It was me. I watched you last night for 16 minutes.
I think it's very
not
unprofessional.
CNN. It's not CNN. It's America's watching you.
Okay, fine.
It's America's watching.
So I was mentioned, so I can bring up something, I think, right? Look, the simple fact is, if you think this is tough and you're not being treated fairly,
isn't tough and easy.
Imagine what it's going to be like dealing with Putin, or dealing with President Xi, or dealing with the Islamic terrorism that exists. This is a tough business to run for president.
I know. You're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is principled. You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see. I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so
Doesn't matter.
Far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
So far I'm doing better. You know, you started off over here, Jeb. You're moving over further and further. Pretty soon you're going to be off the end.
This doesn't do a thing to solve the problem.
One at a time.
Hugh, go ahead. It sounds more and more what my daughter said that I said in the beginning. All the fighting and arguing is not advancing us.
It will not.
It is not the way we're going to strengthen our country. We will strengthen our country when we come together. And look, you've got Rand Paul, you've got Ted Cruz, you've got Marco. You've got a lot of people on this stage that have studied these issues. You know what a leader does? A leader has a sound program, has a good policy, and then brings people together to solve problems. Guess what? Both in Congress and balancing the budget, and in Ohio fixing the economy. And by the way, we talk about defense. The first thing we better get going is strengthening our economy, because if we don't have a strong economy, we can't pay for all of this. And the world wants us to be able to function from strength, believe it or not. Get our economy going, get these people together in a room. We can fix this, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have to fight all the time. It can be done, and we will be great when we join together. Thank you, Hugh.
Dr. Carson, Commander-in-Chief question again. You've been the head of neurosurgery for a big hospital. You're on a lot of boards of a lot of companies. You've traveled the world. You're traveling again next week. But does that prepare you to command troops from Djibouti to Japan, troops from Afghanistan to Iraq, to be in charge of the men and women watching on Armed Service Network tonight?
Well, you know, there's a false narrative that only the political class has the wisdom and the ability to be commander-in-chief. But if you go back and you study the design of our country, it was really designed for the citizen statesman. And we need to be talking about, where does your experience come from? You know, and I've had a lot of experience building things, organizing things. a national scholarship program. One of the things that you'll notice if you look through my life is that I don't do a lot of talking. I do a lot of doing. And really, it says more about a person than how much they talk. And then some people say you're weak because, you're not loud and you're not boisterous and you're not rude. But the fact of the matter is, look and see what I've done. And that speaks volumes about strength.
Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Mr. Trump, Dr. Carson just referenced the single most important job of the president, the command, the control, and the care of our nuclear forces. And he mentioned the triad. The B-52s are older than I am. The missiles are old. The submarines are aging out. It's an executive order. It's a commander-in-chief decision. What's your priority among our nuclear triad?
Well, first of all, I think we need somebody absolutely that we can trust, who's totally responsible, who really knows what he or she is doing, that is so powerful and so important. And one of the things that I'm frankly most proud of is that in 2003, 2004, I was totally against going into Iraq because you're going to destabilize the Middle East. I called it. I called it very strongly, and it was very important. But we have to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful when it comes to nuclear. Nuclear changes the whole ballgame. Frankly, I would have said, get out of Syria, get out. If we didn't have the power of weaponry today, the power is so massive that we can't just leave areas that 50 years ago or 75 years ago we wouldn't care. It was hand-to-hand combat. The biggest problem this world has today is not President Obama with global warming, which is inconceivable. This is what he's saying. The biggest problem we have today is nuclear proliferation, and having some maniac, having some madman go out and get a nuclear weapon. That's, in my opinion, that is the single biggest problem that our country faces
Of the three legs of the triad, though, do you have a priority? Because I want to go to Senator Rubio after that and ask him.
I think for me, nuclear is just the power, the devastation is very important to me.
Senator Rubio, do you have a response?
I do. Well, first, let's explain to people home what the triad is. Maybe a lot of people haven't heard that terminology before. The triad is our ability of the United States to conduct nuclear attacks using airplanes, using missiles launched from silos or from the ground, and also from our nuclear subs, ability to attack. And it's important, all three of them are critical. It gives us the ability at deterrence. Now, some have become more critical than others, for example, the submarines. And that's the Ohio-class submarine that needs to be modernized. The air component also needs to be modernized. The B-52, as someone earlier pointed out, is an outdated model that was flown by the grandparents of people that are flying it now. And we need a serious modernization program as well on our silo-launched missiles. All three are critical for the defense.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Some of you on this stage, the Republican presidential nominee. Hugh, you have a question.
Mr. Trump, my listeners tell me again and again they're worried that Hillary Clinton will win the White House because you run as an independent. Are you ready to reassure Republicans tonight that you will run as a Republican and abide by the decision of the Republicans?
I really am. I'll be honest. I really am. I mean, people have been putting me to question. I really am.
I can applaud. Dr. Carson.
Excuse me. Can I just finish?
Oh, please.
I've gained great respect for the Republican leadership. I've gained great respect for many, and I'm going to even say, in different forms, for the people on the dais. In different forms. But I have great respect for the people I've met through this process. I've never done this process before. I've never been a politician. I mean, 6 months I've been a politician. But I will tell you, I am totally committed to the Republican Party. I feel very honored to be the front runner. And I think I'll do very well if I'm chosen, if I'm so fortunate to be chosen. I think I'll do very well. Polls have come out recently say I would beat Hillary. I will do everything in my power to beat Hillary Clinton. I can promise you.
Dr. Carson, Mr. Trump just committed to stay the distance regardless of the result. How about you?
Well, the statement that I made last week that I would leave the party was contingent upon whether, in fact, the party acts like they have in the past with a lot of subterfuge and dishonesty, or like they're going to act now, because I spoke to Reince Priebus, and he assured me that the Washington Post writer had it all wrong, and that they're not going to be engaging in anything to thwart the will of the people. That's why I got into this race as a member of We the People, to try to bring some honesty and integrity back to the process.
All right, candidates, we have more coming up.